For my advice to be heard and to be best placed, I need to understand the system in which I work. And a system comes with a language. And for these international agreements, it's the language of that legal people use.
Welcome to the Elements of Deep Sea Mining podcast.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's start just briefly. Tell the audience who you are and which hat do you want to be wearing for this podcast.
So I'm Kerstin Kröger. I'm a deep sea ecologist by heart. I work mainly on the assessment of impacts from activities, human activities in offshore waters, mainly in the UK. And the hat I'm wearing today is basically my best scientific hat.
Wearing your best scientific hat, great. Actually, also, I will say that we are recording this here at the Seabed Minerals Conference in Bergen, where you are going to be presenting tomorrow.
And I will be presenting on the potential implication of the agreement under UNCLOS on the protection of the marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction on deep sea mining activities in the area. So lots of legal stuff.
Yeah. And yet you're not a legal.
And yet I'm not a legal expert. So disclaimer, I'm not a legal expert. I'm just very interested in how the legal side of these big agreements works, and then trying to translate that. And it's basically, I have to translate it for myself to understand what it means for somebody who is on deck of a ship and, for instance, takes samples in areas beyond national jurisdiction. What does BB&J now mean? Maybe not so much for the scientist who is a lab rat and just takes the samples, but definitely for the person who's organizing the cruise, and also for the state under which control basically this cruise runs. So the flag state, or if we're talking deep sea mining, the sponsoring state.
Yeah, so fascinating. So I think it's so interesting that you, as a deep sea ecologist, have taken on the role of understanding the legal frameworks around these different, all sorts of different regulatory pieces that fit together for the deep sea mining conversation. Yeah, so say a little bit more about that. Why did you get out of your lane?
I'm not sure I got out of my lane so much. I just am on the sidetrack, maybe. Mm-hmm. I think in order for my advice to be heard and to be best placed, I need to understand the system in which I work. And a system comes with a language. And for these international agreements, it's the language of, legal people, that legal people use. So I need to get my head around that. So first, probably around the concept that different special areas like, science of law, marine science, even, biological science versus oceanographic science, we all use different language. And in order to really understand each other, we have to take a nosedive into the language of the other, basically. Absolutely. And probably you as a Canadian in Norway, me as a German living in the UK, we're quite familiar with the concept of you live in the realm of a different language. And you only get really, really to grips with it if you do understand the language. I think that's just my personal view.
Yeah, this is, I think, absolutely a super important aspect of getting people to communicate using the same language across these important topics. And this has been brought up before by a number of people who kind of work in the more thinking about the policy aspect or the ethics aspect or the interdisciplinarity aspects. I think it's very interesting that you, or coming to this originally from the ecological science, decided that you needed to broaden, or you wanted to broaden out to also understand how other people are talking about these things.
Yeah.
And you say that you got into that through, if I'm going to make my own work relevant, I'm going to make my recommendations heard and able to be acted on, to be able to situate that in the right language.
at least I have to be aware that if I use my own technical lingo, that I might not be understood
Right.
as I hope to be understood. It's this awareness on both directions.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be aware that what I say might not be understood as I mean it, but also that how I understand others might not be how they, my understanding might be different from what they think they say to me.
Yeah.
So it's just this awareness. And I just noticed that what I read in the beginning when I got drawn into this, when I was asked to advise on deep sea mining before ISA council meetings, for instance, I read it in one way. And then I presented some advice, in the typical scientific way, kind of, well, that depends if you see it this way, that way, or the other way. And then the delegation members would just look at me and say, well, yeah. Mm-hmm. And what do you want us to do with it? I realized that if I keep thinking just in scientific terms and how I think as a scientist, that is very important and necessary thinking. So I'm not casting that aside. It's just there is a different way as well that I have to take into consideration when I build my advice. But also from my work as providing advice on human activities like offshore wind or oil or cable laying or dredging, aggregate dredging, mm-hmm. that works within legal frameworks. So I cannot just advise from a scientific point of view. I have to advise within the framework, the legal framework that is in place for that particular activity in that particular place. And I can only do that if I understand the framework, mm-hmm. or at least if I have a pretty good awareness of it. I'm not sure you can always, as a non-legal expert, understand fully everything. But then I wouldn't expect a lawyer to necessarily be able to understand all the scientific implications. But to a certain degrees, I expect them to in that area.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a big problem that gets mentioned a lot is, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the people who are making the decision makers that have to, it's people that are making the decisions that mm-hmm. have to understand. So, I mean, it's not exactly the lawyers that need to, but it's usually lawyers who end up in decision-making roles. And so it is kind of them who need to understand what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it's great that you are taking the responsibility to try to bridge that translation gap. Yeah, and then I a little bit wonder how deeply you have gotten into this legal role that you are starting. Like, is this taking on a life of its own in your research work? Do you still look at it through, I'm an ecologist trying to translate these things into the right language so that decision makers can make decisions? Or, I mean, because now you said you spent a whole year of sabbatical digging into legal.
Yeah, it was actually longer. I was so lucky that I could do a sabbatical for 1.5 years trying to understand the legal landscape of deep sea mining and writing a publication about that. I still see myself as a marine ecologist.
Yeah.
That's from where my advice comes and has to come from.
Sorry, how useful is it to see yourself as a marine biologist and not a lawyer when you're giving?
I think I just see myself as expert.
Yeah.
Everything that I would say in providing my advice will get checked and signed off by people above me. Mm-hmm. And they will look at it from different viewpoints. But at the end of the day, it's the head of a delegation that will decide whether that is taken up or not. And if somebody above me says that, look, you're working for a particular organization and our view on things is different from your personal view, I cannot use my personal views for this matter. Do you understand what I mean? I cannot, for instance, twist science in a way that my opinion on a matter comes out in my advice. And I have to be very aware of that. And I am very aware of that.
Okay, let's talk about BB&J, which is what you're going to present on at 9:30 in the morning, day after tomorrow.
Yeah.
I guess maybe just give a quick chronology of where we're at. BB&J has recently been, what is BB&J?
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. I think a lot of your listeners have heard of UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. UNCLOS is what's called a framework agreement. It's an overarching agreement that has very high aspirations, but it doesn't go very much into the detail of how to implement things. Out of UNCLOS have come 3 implementing agreements so far. The first one was the 1994 agreement that deals with the implementation of Part 11, I believe, of UNCLOS, which is that part of UNCLOS that deals with the area. So that is, I can't, quote verbatim here, but that is, the seabed and the subsoil thereof in areas beyond national jurisdiction.
Yeah.
That is, in other words, that deals with seabed mining in the area. Mm-hmm. Then we have the 1995 agreement that deals with the protection of straddling fish stocks and highly migratory fish species. So that's about the protection of fish in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And then there's been a gap, no new agreements, but BB&J has been negotiated for 20 years and has entered into force on the 17th of January 2026. And that agreement deals with the protection of the marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. And short for that is BB&J or BB&J Agreement. It also gets referenced or referred to as High Seas Treaty, which I personally don't really like. I think it's a bit misleading because the remit of BB&J is the high seas and the areas. So all areas beyond national jurisdiction.
So what's the distinction really between the high seas and the
area beyond national jurisdiction? There's 3 aspects. So the high seas, think of marine scientists talk of a water column. Now, obviously, that is not a column in the water like a Greek column. So that is basically the waters overlaying the seabed in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And the area is the sea floor, but the area is smaller, slightly smaller than the high seas because of this provision in UNCLOS that coastal states can apply for an extension or can file for an extension of their continental shelf beyond the 200 nautical mile zone if they can prove that land out there, or the seabed out there rather, is an extension of the continental shelf. Out to, don't quote me, 300 something, I think, nautical miles. And then if they're granted that, and there's no official different declaration made or the decision made, it's all very complicated. Mm-hmm. And that's not my area. So that's the area I take my words with caution. I don't believe everything I say here. That's the area basically they then have jurisdiction over, but only the seafloor and the mineral reserves of the seafloor. So the overlying water would still be high seas, but the seabed would be an extended continental shelf of which the coastal state has jurisdiction over.
Okay, this makes sense. This actually, Kaya Fjordhoft, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, explained this to me from the Norwegian perspective. I just never made the connection to the international perspective. So yeah, Norway has extended its continental shelf. We don't get to call that its extended economic zone beyond 200 nautical miles, which is still a bit confusing to me because I think a lot of people do say that Norway is now going to be doing deep sea mining related activities in its extended economic zone.
No.
But that's actually, it's doing deep sea mining activities on its extended continental shelf.
Yes.
Which is within Norway's area and outside of the areas beyond national jurisdiction. So Norway has extended its continental shelf to within its national jurisdiction. And so the area beyond national jurisdiction is slightly smaller.
The area is smaller, but yeah.
The high seas.
Is the water body, basically.
And so above, the area above Norway's extended continental shelf is still the high seas.
Yes. And the freedoms of the high seas, the so-called freedoms of the high seas, still apply in those waters.
Great. So I had kind of thought that provisions that the ISA has implemented over the last 30 years have protected, they've implemented certain measures that protect biology, life forms, whatever, in the area. And now the BB&J is coming in and implementing provisions that protect biology in the high seas. It's almost like the BB&J is catching up a little bit to what the ISA has already done for the area.
That impression is there. But the ISA only has a remit over the protection of the marine environment, and the marine environment contains marine biology, so to speak. But BB&J is particularly for the protection of marine biodiversity, and also to share any benefits that come out, any financial benefits that might come out of marine genetic resources from areas beyond national jurisdiction, and that those benefits get equitably shared. For the ISA, the mechanisms for that, we are far away from having those established, because BB&J has just come into force. While we speak here, the third, or PrepCom 3, is taking place in New York, preparing for the first conference of the party, which the conference of party has to be held within 1 year of BB&J coming into force. So, and at that first COP, that's the time when decisions will be made about how is the secretary to function? How's the whole BB&J to function? So very early days for BB&J at this stage. And all we have to go on in terms of what are the implications for other agreements is basically the agreement text at this stage.
Interesting. Okay. The big question I want to ask is just how does this BB&J, what implications does it have for deep sea mining? What implications does it have for, and what you said about they've put in a provision for equitable sharing of benefits from marine biotic resources.
Marine genetic resources, MGRs.
Okay, marine genetic resources. There's already a provision in the mining code that says there has to be equitable sharing of marine mineral resources from the seafloor.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that. I had assumed that this conversation about marine genetic resources, when I'd heard about it previously, that this was something that was also kind of in the remit of the ISA.
No, that is not in the remit of the ISA. Deep sea mining is already, it's a nascent industry that not everybody knows about, or at least not everybody is as much aware of it as offshore wind, for instance. Bioprospecting is probably even less known.
Yeah.
Bioprospecting is basically using genetic material, doesn't have to be marine, and looking at the biochemical properties of an organism, if that property would be useful for human utilization, and then trying, if one of them is identified, trying to copy them. So it's not about, I find a sponge and that sponge has a wonderful property and I can use it into some antibacterial properties that I can then use in a medical drug. And so therefore I will go and try to get as much of the sponge material. That's not the idea. The idea is rather to copy that biochemical property, the molecule structure, if you have it.
Yeah.
And then make it in the lab, which is actually, that is absolutely not my area. That is my very lay person's understanding of it. And marine biology, so marine specimens or species, they have a lot of these biochemical properties that are really interesting for humans to identify them, copy them, if possible, produce them in the lab, and then in a higher industrial level. Yeah. Basically, you have to patent them, and then it's a world that is beyond my experience, basically. Very important products have come out of marine organisms. So one is, for instance, an enzyme that I believe comes from a deep sea sponge that is used in laundry powder, laundry detergents, so that enzymes can be washed out at lower temperatures, so that you get cleaner wash at lower temperatures, and thereby we save energy. But most of these products that are out there have been developed from marine genetic resources, so marine organisms found in the EZ of countries.
This avoids the complication of how this BB&J is going to...
Yes. And now we come to that, of course, most of the deep sea areas of the world are in, areas beyond national jurisdiction. Right. And under the common heritage principle of UNCLOS, any financial benefits that come out of that should also be shared. Equitable, should be seen as common heritage. That is one pillar of BB&J. BB&J has 4 pillars.
Okay, well, I should let you get to those 4 pillars, but I'm going to ask more about this one first. Because having thought about this only through the deep sea mining lens, it's in the deep sea mining case, we have no idea how to equitably share benefits, but that's okay for the time being because we're not doing the mining right now. But with BB&J, there's nothing to stop somebody from making discovery right now that would be beneficial, and then this problem of not being able to share those benefits would have some catching up to do.
Yes. I come back to what you just said, only having looked at it through the deep sea mining lens. That's the lens I come from as well. Yeah. And then I was invited to co-share a panel for a BB&J workshop. And I was surrounded by people who only saw BB&J through the lens of bioprospecting. And for them, BB&J was all about that. And then you have another community, another pillar, as I mentioned, the 4 pillars or the 4 elements that are mainly addressed in BB&J. One are the marine genetic resources. And by the way, as soon as you take any sample that contains genetic code, you have obligations under BB&J.
So everyone who's taking samples has huge obligations.
Not necessarily huge obligations, but obligations under BB&J. Yeah. If those samples come from areas beyond national jurisdiction. And that is the connection then, for instance, one of the connections to deep sea mining, because for baseline assessment, for those surveys that go out to take, the necessary data to establish an environmental baseline, they will take samples. And it doesn't matter, from my understanding, that these samples are not taken with the intention to use them for bioprospecting. As soon as you take a sample that contains genetic code, so that could be a box core sample, that could be a multi-core sample, that could be a trawl sample, that could be a plankton sample, a water sample to establish abundance of, bacteria or viruses or fungi in the water that contains genetic code. Part 2 of of BB&J will apply.
Okay, so is this causing any issues?
No, I don't think many people are aware of it yet.
Yeah, okay, so it's not the kind of thing that, now you have to report on this thing.
No. People working, taxonomists, they look into this, they interact with it and advise a lot. So they are pretty much aware of it. And, taxonomic collections, how will they implement that? Because one of the things under this second part or part 2 of BB&J is that a state that has ratified BB&J has to notify a mechanism that's called the clearinghouse mechanism of a cruise that happens under its control or jurisdiction, say a Norwegian research vessel, for instance, or a German contractor goes out and samples in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, which is clearly area beyond national jurisdiction, take samples and know, they know they will take samples there with biological content. So that state then has to notify the clearinghouse mechanism of BB&J as soon as possible, but at least 6 months before the cruise is supposed to depart, with information about that cruise and what samples are taken with which methods. There's quite a lot of room for flexibility in the wording of those provisions because everybody realizes that you can plan a cruise as much as you like, but 6 months before, between 6 months ahead and the actually leaving date, a lot of things will happen and change. And even more so once you're at sea, because basically once you're at sea, you have your cruise plan and your sampling plan, but you're so dependent on so many different things that things change all the time. And there's room for that in the provision of BB&J.
So did the BB&J create a body like the ISA that will manage?
Clearinghouse mechanism? Yeah. Yes. At the moment, we only have what it says in the agreement, how this structure of BB&J will look like. So there will be a secretariat, and the secretariat is to manage this clearinghouse mechanism. How the mechanism will look like in detail, how it will work in detail, that is all, still in the making. We don't know yet. It's far too early. BB&J is it's not even learning to walk. It's not even there yet. The first conference of the party has not happened yet. The organization I'm most familiar with is the International Seabed Authority. So I try to compare it, how do the functions match? How do the different subsidiary bodies and the different bodies match? So you have the secretariat. I think I don't know whether they be the same in every function, but the general function of the secretariat. Mm-hmm. Then for the ISA, you have the council and the assembly. Those are the council doesn't make the decision, but it sets everything into place to make the decisions. And then the assembly, makes the big decisions. That will be done by the conference of the parties. For the ISA, only council members can take decisions within council. So that is it 36 members of the ISA on a complicated rotating system? I understand the conference of the party, every member, every state that has ratified BB&J has a say there, as far as I understand.
Okay, well then I feel like I should let you at least lay out the 4 pillars here.
Okay, so one we already have, the marine genetic resources. In a way, I don't know if that's fair to say, but you can call deep sea mining as collateral damage, that they have to report, that there will be reporting obligations under BB&J, because that part of BB&J was not made. I don't think it was made with having this or that particular industry in mind. I think that was clearly made to account for bioprospecting and what that could mean for protection of the biodiversity of the high seas and sharing any benefit from that.
In that bioprospecting pillar, are there some provisions that go towards protecting the biodiversity?
No, not really. No.
Because when you're bioprospecting, you're sampling, you're not really doing activities that are threatening to biodiversity.
No, and all the knowledge that is generated has to be shared.
Yeah.
That's another function of the clearinghouse mechanism, which you can imagine as a huge repository for all data, information, reports. But not only to hold that information in a central place, and place is, I don't think you can understand place here as a location, but you know what I mean. But also to make it easy to access that information, to share that information, to disseminate the information.
This pillar sounds all very positive. Like everything about it is just trying to make what could be a win-win situation into as much of a overall positive, to get as much information out there into as many hands as possible, and to make sure that benefits are shared in a good way, and we'll figure out in the future.
But that's the same with UNCLOS, isn't it? Sorry that I've interrupted you there. Mm-hmm. I think the devil will lie in the detail.
Yeah.
And that still has to be developed, but I'm hopeful. Moving on to the other pillars. So the next pillar then are area-based management tools such as MPAs, marine protected areas. That is an area that is clearly, there's a need for it. We do have some high seas MPAs, but not many. And there's, of course, the goal of, 30 by 30, that 30% of our seas are to be protected. And that includes all seas, the high seas. The high seas under nobody's jurisdiction, or under the jurisdiction of all of us, whichever way around you want to see it. That, of course, is difficult to implement. And there are quite a few of international legal frameworks and bodies and organizations in place that can implement MPAs. So we have, for instance, OSPA, the Oslo-Paris Convention for the Protection of the Northeast Atlantic. I think the MMO also can implement MPAs. But BB&J tries to bring all these different ways of implementing MPAs together and to better coordinate them. How that is going to work out is still, written in the stars. Because it's too early, we don't know yet. But there will have to be modalities put in place to make these organizations talk and cooperate and coordinate.
Okay, so first of all, this is somewhere that BB&J is doing something that the ISA does for the seabed.
Yeah.
ISA sets essentially protected areas aside, and now the BB&J is doing this for the water column. Kind of, it seems to me like it's the same task being repeated for the different jurisdiction.
Not quite. The ISA, can set areas aside, but they are only protected from activities of deep sea mining. I can declare Clipperton Zone probably the only activity that will happen there at the seafloor. But say if anybody would get the idea of doing anything else there, I don't think the ISA would have the remit.
So the thing that jumps out to me then is bottom trawling, which
you wouldn't do in 6,000 meters depth.
Right, but the ISA would have the jurisdiction of protecting the seafloor in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So anyone who's bottom trawling in areas beyond national jurisdiction would kind of be impacting the seafloor in somewhere that the ISA has responsibility. So if someone wanted to say, no, this area of seafloor is protected, that would have to be the ISA. Does that make sense? You're looking at me like that doesn't make sense.
I doubt that the ISA can say anything about bottom trawling.
Right, because
it's not the remit of the ISA to say anything about bottom trawling or that is what is called the fragmentation of ocean governance. You have all these different bodies having the remit for certain activities or certain regions. Now, BB&J can actually implement area-based management tools such as MPAs for all activities, from what I understand. And it's not, they can also implement those MPAs that they not only protect the water column, so the high seas, but also the sea floor.
Yeah, okay, great. So BB&J has jurisdiction over the seafloor as well. It's not that there's this clear definition. If it happens in the water, it's BB&J, and if it happens on the
seafloor, it's the ISA. No, the ISA is within the context of deep sea mining activities.
Interesting.
While I say it, I doubt myself in a way, but
but I mean, it makes sense in the sense of trying to make a unified regulatory system.
Exactly. Yes.
To address this fragmentation that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Let's give this authority enough jurisdiction to actually deal with.
Yeah.
Problems.
There is a very important provision under BB&J, and that is the not undermining provision. I think that's Article 3. And basically it says that BB&J should be interpreted and applied in such a manner that it does not undermine other relevant international frameworks, organizations, bodies, regional, international. So that is clearly a call for building bridges and not so much for defending fences.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand it in that way, and I hope it will be applied in that way. I know that in the discussion, the build-up to BB&J, I'm sure there is a bit of angst around whether there's a conflict of remits. So we have wonderful examples here in the Northeast Atlantic with OSPA. So OSPA has a remit in the OSPA area, I think it's called, to implement MPAs. Mm-hmm. So a member state of OSPA has to propose it and has to, I'm not sure whether it's called sponsoring or, has to put it forward basically to OSPA. These MPAs can be in areas beyond national jurisdiction that overlap with the OSPA area. Some of these MPAs is really, really complicated. Some of these MPAs only protect the high seas area, so the water column part. Some of these MPAs protect both. some of them protect one or the other. It's, yeah. And it all depends on jurisdiction of A, the water column, and B, the seafloor. Yeah. And they're not always the same in, the same geographical location, as we said before, when it comes to extended continental shelves. And that makes it very, very complicated.
Yeah. I mean, this is certainly something that I learned doing this podcast. Everything is more and more complicated than you would imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are area-based management tools beyond MPAs, beyond marine protected areas? What else falls into the bucket of area-based management tools?
It could be spatial closures for a certain industry. It could be temporal closures. That is applied quite often to fisheries measures. Mm-hmm. You protect an area for a certain time, either when, say, fish are spawning in that area, or for migratory species when a particular area becomes very important to a species. So like a nursing ground for marine mammals, for instance, or, where they calve or something like that. So the protection is only like seasonal. What are other area-based management tools? I struggle probably to find more examples now on top of my head. Basically, it has to be defined for a certain area with conservation objectives and management measures in place. Okay.
We've made it through 2 of 4 pillars.
Yes. Then there's the environmental impact assessment. Activities or a state under whose jurisdiction or control an activity is planned, areas beyond national jurisdiction must, if the state is a member to BB&J or a member of BB&J, must conduct an environmental impact assessment in line with BB&J requirements. And also, if those activities are within the national jurisdiction of the state, but if the impacts could go further and impact areas beyond national jurisdiction. Okay. So then also an EIA must be conducted. And it could be an EIA under the national process under those conditions.
Yeah, so then there's going to have to be some details forthcoming on exactly what is required by.
Yes. Yeah.
And so this is another case where it seems analogous to what the ISA has already done.
Put into place, yes. And there's a provision in BB&J recognizing that and saying that an EIA done under another international framework, relevant framework, that is equivalent to the requirements to an EIA under BB&J, that is, seen as equivalent.
Okay.
So then, there's no chance of doubling up, if that's what you mean. Say a contractor in the area does not have to do 2 EIAs, right. one under ISA, under the ISA mining code, and one under BB&J. No, there's only the one. But make sure that it, fulfills BB&J or whatever the stricter requirements are of the 2.
Yeah, so this is an example of where the puzzle pieces are going to be nicely fitting together.
Yeah. So, and then the 4th has to do with capacity building and transfer of marine technology.
Okay.
That's the 4th pillar of BB&J. And again, coming back to ISA, the ISA is already doing a lot on that. I mean, every contractor has obligations to sponsor basically scientists from developing countries or small island state countries, learning by doing on a cruise or ensuring that they get training somewhere. So they are called by the contractors through the ISA if they have places available or if they're looking for candidates.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know about that. And it's interesting that is a high enough priority to make it as one of the pillars of the BB&J that we are. It's sort of a knowledge sharing and I guess an equalizing.
Yes. Yeah. I have high hopes for BB&J, but we have to give it time and not expect too much too soon, I think.
Okay. So then my next question is, what are the teeth of BB&J? Presuming there's no teeth yet, but what can you say about where the teeth are going to be?
Good question.
I mean, this is always the question.
That's always the question. It's wonderful to have these things in place, but what about enforcement?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a problem that will have to be addressed through the COP, through the process.
Mm-hmm.
If there are the means, if there are the financial means, if there's willingness. But basically the enforcement, the responsibility to ensure that an activity is conducted under BB&J, whatever is in place and whatever the provisions are for different activities, that lies with the state party under, I'm never sure, is it under which or under whose jurisdiction control that activity is happening?
Right. So if I am a Norwegian research cruise happening on a Norwegian research vessel, and I use,
then Norway would be the authority to ensure that you're fulfilling BB&J obligations. Right.
So hopefully we don't always at least need to have some international court try to sort these things out. Ideally, the domestic legal systems ought to enforce these things. Yeah.
And it depends on how a state is set up, how the legal system of a government is set up, how they can, ensure in their own legislation that their contractors are fulfilling BB&J obligations. That is depending on the national legislation. And now I'm veering into an area I do not know anything about.
Okay, well then, so I feel like you have given a good overview of what BB&J is about. I've learned a lot. So then, how do you see it? What are the impacts on the deep sea mining proto industry of this BB&J having been agreed upon? Because when I first looked into this, I kind of saw it as, this is, they're adding more puzzle pieces in the areas around what the ISA does, but I didn't see where it really has any impact directly on any deep sea mining related activities.
I think the impacts won't be tremendous or awful from an operator's point of view. And I mean, me not being an operator, I don't really know, or contractor kind of,
Yeah.
But it's the notification. There will have to be more transparency under BB&J, simply because all the information that we talked about, all these cruise details, the locations, the samples, the access to samples also, samples have to be accessible. The data has to be accessible, unless it's confidential information or proprietary information. But otherwise, all that knowledge, information, data, it all has to be declared to the clearinghouse mechanism where, it can be accessed. Stakeholder consultations, all that has to be very transparent as well. We don't know how it looks like for exploitative activities yet either. Right. Because, the draft we're still at the stage of, negotiating the draft regulations. Yeah. So we don't know yet how that will look like under the mining code. And I can only guess here, but from the last council meeting, we know that countries, member states to the ISA are very much aware of BB&J and point out that, BB&J has to be taken into consideration. Yeah. And the ISA has been very aware of BB&J as well. And I mean, they definitely have an observer status. There has been one report in 2023 commissioned by the ISA Secretariat on the contribution the ISA already makes to some of the obligations under BB&J. And at the recent council meeting, in the report of Madame
Secretary General.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Secretary General. There's been a draft decision being put to consideration of Council about establishing a way to coordinate with BB&J and to set up modalities for this process. And I don't think a decision has been made because some council members felt like it's a bit too early because we don't know yet how BB&J will develop basically, and what the organization will look like and what the different bodies are. And that. So, I think this decision has been parked for the time being, but there's definitely a lot of awareness.
Okay. So you don't foresee any really big onerous impacts on actors in the deep sea mining. I mean, it seems to me like you mentioned there's going to be additional reporting, additional data sharing, but at least there's, I hear a lot of talk that deep sea contractors already do a lot of data sharing. I'm not sure to what extent that is mandatory. Maybe there's going to be more mandatory data sharing.
Well, also the way it is shared, probably, because there will be now a central, the clearinghouse mechanism, and hopefully the clearinghouse mechanism will at some stage link up to the ISA database, because the ISA has a central database where all the data goes into, which I haven't used it personally. I only have heard that it is not the easiest database in the world to use, but I'm not a database user. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of room for coordination, cooperation. Otherwise, of course, the area-based management tools, they might throw up a few hiccups. Simply because at the moment, I think that there is a fear that some countries might propose, so some state parties to BB&J might propose MPAs for areas that could be interesting for the ISA, or where, marine minerals might be found. That then could be a conflict, could be a situation for conflict. To a certain extent, we have that happening with an OSPA MPA that is situated somewhere along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So that's an area that could possibly be interesting for cobalt-rich mining or for SMS mining. And is it the Evlanov, something with Evlanov Simon? It's a very long name. I can't remember what it is. That is an OSPA MPA in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So that the seabed, if that becomes interesting for seabed mining activities, that then would be the remit of the ISA. But the ISA and OSPA have an MOU. They have that in place for those situations to then, get their heads together to come to a solution that is satisfactory for both parties. And I think that will be also one of the main difficulties in setting up BB&J, getting all the parties around the table and talk with each other, not to each other, but with each other, to coordinate and to work together for the protection of our oceans and for ocean governance. As I said before, time to not defend fences anymore, but to build bridges.
Okay, well, on the topic of getting people to work together and building bridges, before I let you go, I want to ask you about your experience of the deep sea mining, the tone of the deep sea mining conversation, and what it's like to have been in the deep sea mining conversation from your perspective. So first, is there anything else that you feel is important to say on BB&J?
Watch the space, I can only say, because this is history in the making. I feel very, very privileged actually to be able to, to live at a time to see this and develop and also to, add my tiny, tiny little bit of advice to it. And I feel really privileged, that I have that opportunity.
Great.
So, yeah, it's really, ocean governance, that doesn't happen every day.
Yeah, that's an interesting, helpful, kind of elevates the significance.
Yeah. Yeah. And all these agreements are a child of their time. When UNCLOS was put into place, the common heritage of mankind, that was actually seen by the makers, so to speak, as more an experimental economic, like an economic experiment.
Yeah.
I think it was Edwin Pardo, I can't remember his first name, Pardo, and Elizabeth Mann-Borghese, who put that together. And actually, funny coincidence here, Elizabeth Mann-Borghese is the daughter of Thomas Mann, the Literature Nobel Prize person who wrote The Magic Mountain and Buddenbrooks, and actually came from my area of Germany. Well, roughly my area. So, yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, then, yeah. took us a while getting started here, so I want to also get some of your thoughts on...
Oh, the discussion on deep sea mining.
Yeah, I want to hear. So how long have you been working on deep sea mining? I asked you this before we started recording, but how long have you been in this space?
I reckon 10 to 15 years. I'm not a person to count years, how long I've worked on something. So,
and then, I mean, broadly, I guess one question is how do you experience the tone of the dialogue around this? Is this more contentious? Is this more polarized? It seems to me like a very polarized topic, but this is the one topic that I've been suddenly kind of engaging in. And so sometimes I wonder, okay, maybe all international negotiations and maybe all industries have their battles. So first of all, tell me, how do you experience the deep sea mining space?
I think the wording has become very guarded. People are very careful what they say to whom and where, because the discussion can be so polarized.
Interesting. So guarded, another way of saying that is self-censoring.
Yeah, I think self-censoring to protect oneself.
So part of the tone of the conversation is overly polarized, but you're also saying that it's also guarded. It's also, there's less...
I think as a result of it being so polarized. Yeah.
So there's kind of less open dialogue. There's less open exchange. There's less communication.
Yeah.
Because people are, for some reason, hesitant to speak openly. Yeah.
I think there's, to a certain part, it depends where that discussion takes place and who discusses it. Sometimes the positions you find in LinkedIn blogs, for instance, I mean, I just shake my head and think kind of, you don't have the whole picture. You don't even have part of the picture. So your statement as such is so unqualified in a way. And it is fine to have an opinion. Of course, everybody can have an opinion and everybody is, entitled to an opinion. But then if facts are used and taken out of context, or if only one side of the story is told, then I'm getting a little bit annoyed and frustrated, I have to say, because I simply expect people to do better and to do their research better.
Yeah. Okay. So, but this is this is slightly separate than the guarded thing. There's some amount of overly, it's polarized. This is an amount of kind of one-sided, brash, I'm only looking at this from my angle, which is, one of the things that I'm interested a lot in researching is how we get people to make these difficult, hard choices, the trade-off decisions, to see both sides and to recognize. And it seems to me sometimes that the way that people make these decisions is by only looking at their one piece of the picture.
Agree.
Okay, so maybe then the next question I want to ask you is, which piece of the picture do you feel that you see, and how do you personally relate to the whole picture? Well,
I try to see as many parts of the picture as possible.
Where did you come into the picture from when you first came into the deep sea?
I came into it from a purely nosy perspective, as in being very interested in deep sea ecology, seeing this as a potential area to work in, basically, to stay, within. Because it's not that easy to find a job in, where you work with in the deep sea context. So I came from that perspective, and probably also very much from the perspective of a marine scientist who wants to protect the deep sea. And then the more I learned about the picture, you can see it. Basically, I started with a few puzzle pieces that were in one corner of the picture, and I keep adding puzzle pieces. And sometimes, they fit in with something else. I hope our conversation has helped you to put a few puzzle pieces into place. And sometimes they still sit a little bit on their own. And the picture is getting more and more complex. The more I know, in a way, the more I know, the more I learn, the less I know, or the less I understand, or the less, that's probably not quite true, the less I can make a clear decision for myself because I'm undecided on this.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I wouldn't like to see any harm done to the deep sea, but I don't like to see any harm done to the environment anyway. So when I fly across, to where I go and I see a landscape that is purely fields, no woods, no hedges, no nothing, then that saddens me. That is as much abuse of nature and the environment as deep sea mining is. I cannot make up my mind which is worse. Whether, mining of land resources, if we continue with that, and we will continue with that, no matter whether deep sea mining will take place or not. I cannot give you an answer on that one, where I stand on that. I am undecided. I still, add puzzle pieces in the hope that one day I will understand and I will see the whole picture. But maybe that's an illusion.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have two directions I'd like to go, but what do you wish that you would see more of in the deep sea mining conversation? I mean, I asked this question about how do we make decisions under trade-offs in situations where we have to make trade-offs. How do you advise people to improve their thinking around making a trade-off decision? And I'm still very much trying to figure out how to ask this question in a sensible way. One way is, what do you wish that people would take more into account when trying to make this decision around whether, even if it's just whether to support deep sea mining or not?
I think the view of lesser developed countries and small island states. If you have the water rising around you and you don't have many options and you need money to resettle your population maybe in a few years' time, then I can understand if you would go down the route of deep sea mining. I'm in no position to judge anybody on that. I just wish people would take the viewpoint and the motivation behind people's decisions more into consideration.
Interesting. I want to hear more about why you think people, just to take it back, why are people self-censoring? What is it that is making people hesitant to I think some people, like you sort of commented that some people voice their opinions too loudly and without kind of enough nuance and without enough humility.
Yeah.
But
it's okay to voice your opinion loudly. That's not a problem. I think what you are trying to get to is that people are easily put into a camp. You're either this or that.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I don't think anybody really likes to be put into,
Seems like some people are eager to make sure that they are seen to be in one camp. Seems like, when you said some people are, I keep thinking self-censoring, you used a good word. What did you say?
I said guarded.
When some people are being guarded in their their opinions, I sometimes feel like that's because they are afraid to be seen as outside of the camp that they want to identify with. You think I'm wrong about that?
But what about people who don't identify themselves with any camp?
I feel like that would be nice. I guess I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah. I actually think that it's a fear of losing your reputation.
Yeah.
It probably boils down to that, or that at least is a big part of it. You risk losing your standing with a certain community.
Isn't it interesting that your stance on something which is so undecided, unknown, should risk your stance, risk your standing in a community?
Yeah, I think it's sad.
Particularly if that community is identified strongly as scientific.
Yes, maybe it's also that, we're getting big time into science philosophy and, that's not an area I know very much about. But is science really objective? Science should probably be objective, or at least if we claim it is objective, we should acknowledge there's a human element that you cannot take out of science. I cannot separate my thoughts or how I interpret results, for instance. You can word the same fact in very different ways. And I think that's happening sometimes, that the fact then, whatever the fact is worded either pro or...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The framing.
Yeah, the framing, which part of the story you tell, or if you leave out certain details, or, you leave out the little qualifier.
Yeah, and which part of the story you go looking for.
Yeah, that as well, yeah.
Certainly.
So a wonderful example for that is, if I may bring that out, is there's a paper that came out recently, and I think it said that about a third of the macrofauna component in mining tracks did not survive. And when I read that, I thought, oh, that's actually, wow.
2/3 survived.
2/3 survived, yeah. And it's only the macrofauna, which actually means is those part between 300 micron and probably 1-2 centimeters maximum.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the whole fauna out there. It's that particular part, and just in the mining tracks, which are the areas, where the mining vehicle obviously goes along, and the full weight of it, well, not the full weight, because buoyancy takes a lot of the weight away from that. But that's actually far less. What do people think kind of survives when a car goes over it?
Yeah.
Or a tank. But what came out in the media quite often was 1/3 of all biodiversity will die.
Yeah, and the media is another complicating factor.
Oh, yeah.
In this is, even if you say that statistic both ways, the media is going to pick up the most attention-grabbing phrasing, or they're going to make something even more attention-grabbing, and so that's more complicated. I also sometimes wonder if we're going down the path of speculating on the philosophy of, or even the psychology of science. I feel as where we're heading is, people have a fear. We know we're in a ecological crisis. We know we're in a planetary boundary crisis. There's so many ways to describe this, but I sometimes wonder if the deep sea mining conversation, if it wasn't happening in the context of this broader planetary environmental crisis, if it wouldn't trigger so much almost like a fear reaction, like we can't also go and destroy this new environment. And if we weren't already threatening all of the other environments, that people would have a different reaction.
It's also, that was the last realm that, how do they usually word it? Pristine?
Yeah.
Well, the deep sea isn't pristine. I mean, I went on surveys many, many years ago, probably 20 years ago, and the Indian Ocean, 5,000 meters, and what did we bring up? Pepsi cans. There are other liquids available. Our rubbish is everywhere. It just takes much longer to get to the deep sea in certain instances because of the oceanic currents, until it gets there. But it's not pristine. But that was kind of our last claim to, or we've left that and the mountaintops, we've left them basically intact, and that's fine. We still haven't destroyed all.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you worry a little bit when you talk this way that you're going to get put into a camp?
Yeah, I do worry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just tell myself that, well, somebody has to say it. We cannot shy away from it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to think these things through and not just put a wonderful, put on some rose-tinted glasses and also see things in relation.
Yeah.
When people talk about, nature, well, I mean, which country really has nature left in it? The Western countries, how much nature is really... Okay, Norway is quite, really lucky in that respect. Scandinavian countries. Coming from Germany, less so.
Yeah, what is to Norway from Canada?
Okay, yeah.
Different
perspective again, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this, like, it does feel like I'm worried now if you emphasize these, if you emphasize that when we say 30% of the macrofauna died, that means that 70% didn't die.
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to be kind of put into a camp of people who are, and I haven't heard anybody use this like apologist framing, but I think that's sort of going on in the mind. Like you're being an apologist for the deep sea mining
I see.
side.
Yeah.
But I would suggest that actually, if you aren't able to say that statistic in both ways, then the people who you're trying to engage with are not going to want to engage with you. If you always say 30% died and never say, but 70% survived, then the people who are on the other side of the aisle, not that you're almost out of the aisle, but you know what I mean, who always want to say the 70% survived and never want to say, like, that conversation is just never going to get there. So it seems to me like it would be nice if more people risked the standing consequences and made the effort to have that conversation and bring in all of the other viewpoints, because then the conversation can people on different sides of the table can actually then talk. It's like what you started out by saying, how you're looking into the legal aspect in order to be a bridge between the biologists and the lawyers and decision makers. I also think that there's a role here for people to bridge between two sides of this conversation.
Yeah. If the willingness is there for these bridges to exist.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like I've put us both through a fairly long conversation. Is there anything else you would like to touch on before we wrap?
No, I think kind of before we end up going into really deep philosophical discussions, we need a beer.
Let's do that.
But one thing I'd like to say is that sometimes work in this area, it feels to me a little bit like a Greek tragedy.
Yeah.
Whichever way it's decided, harm will happen. And that is simply a consequence of whatever we do. There are costs to it. There are costs to if we decide not to go ahead with deep sea mining. And maybe it's not so much the Western world that has to bear the brunt of these costs. If we decide to go for deep sea mining, there will also be costs. There is no solution, basically, that does not involve harming something somewhere. Yeah. And that's the whole thing about what we talked about before when we met on the way into Bergen. Sustainability sounds great, but sustainability also means, yes, there is some harm. Some harm is be done. That seems to be inherent in human life, basically. We always leave a footprint. And that's just something to be aware of, I think. And where each of us can, just try to limit the footprint a tiny, weeny bit.
Where do you send people who want to know more about the BB&J? Is there having looked into this now on your own behalf, is there a particularly good source that you suggest people start if they want to?
There are quite a few information papers and briefs put out by DOSI. I'm sure DOSI has been mentioned, and I think I've heard it mentioned on your podcast. So if you go on the DOSI web pages, there's information. There's information through the United Nations. At the moment, the organization in charge of BB&J is called UN DAOLOS, DAOLOS, I think. It's another weird acronym. They have a lot of information material about BB&J. That will be the first kind of points.
Great, that sounds great. And yeah, DOSI, Deep Ocean Stewardship
Initiative, yes.
They try to be just an information source to all parties in all ocean issues, right? They're a very neutral, scientific, understanding, promoting organization.
Yes, so you have different working groups in DOSI. So there's one on deep sea mining, there's one on climate change, there's one on BB&J, and it's scientists who give their time to advise, and DOSI has observer status at the BB&J, at the ISA, and other organizations. But there are other organizations as well. ACOPS is one of them, the Advisory Committee on Ocean Policy. They advise also. It's also voluntary involvement. There are quite a range of organizations that try to provide unbiased advice.
Okay, then with that, thanks very much for taking the time with me.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.